Okay, here's the thought. What if the European Union, this project meant to bring nations together, barely 30 years old, is already, well, showing signs of acting like an old, declining empire?
It's a stark comparison, isn't it? Especially when you think about, say, the Roman Empire lasting in different forms for millennia.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive into some analyses suggesting exactly that Europe's leadership might be making these desperate moves, these big gambles, just to stay relevant on the world stage.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging perspective. We're going to look at expert views, pull in some history, the Balkan Wars, the Yugoslav conflicts, and even, surprisingly, an energy crisis happening right now in South Africa.
Right. And our goal here is really to unpack what these analyses are saying, what the implications might be for you listening.
Let's get into it.
So this idea of Europe showing cracks, where do these analysts pinpoint the main issue? They talk about a neo-Roman delusion. What exactly does that mean?
Well, the core idea, according to these sources, is that European elites are trying to wield power, almost like a modern Rome, using NATO and the EU. It's about securing resources from the East. Some estimate Russia has like $75 trillion in untapped natural wealth, and pushing back against other global players like the BRICS nations.
Okay, so projecting power, securing resources, and part of this delusion, if you will, involves Ukraine. There's apparently a real fear about a U.S. brokered peace deal.
That's a key point in these analyses, yeah. The fear is that if the U.S. steps in and brokers peace, Europe gets sidelined, completely cut out. Ukraine might get partition, the U.S. looks stronger, and Europe loses influence. So the thinking goes they'd rather keep the conflict going, maybe reject peace feelers to maintain some control over the outcome.
It really does sound like kicking the can down the road, but with incredibly high stakes. What are the biggest risks they're running, according to these sources? Maybe start with demographics.
Definitely. Demographics are a huge one. You've got falling birth rates across Europe, serious gaps in military recruitment. And here's where it gets controversial. Some analyses suggest there's a move, or at least consideration, towards essentially militarizing migrant populations to fill those gaps.
Wow, okay. That immediately brings up, well, questions of loyalty. Yeah.
Exactly. A huge loyalty question. It has echoes, really strong echoes, of ancient Rome relying on foreign troops. Think about the Battle of Adrianople, 378 AD. That reliance backfired spectacularly. It showed just how fragile that kind of setup can be.
So demographic pressure is one thing, but then there's the economy. Stagnation seems to be forcing some pretty radical ideas, like grabbing Russia's frozen central bank assets, around $300 billion.
Right. And while it's often framed as, making Russia pay or justice, the deeper implication, according to these analyses, is quite profound.
How so?
It's not just a penalty. Seizing sovereign reserves like that, it basically undermines the entire idea of Europe, or the West broadly, as a safe place to keep your money.
Ah, okay. It sends a message globally.
A chilling message, yeah. If sovereign assets aren't safe, why would other countries keep their reserves in dollars or euros? It could genuinely speed up this move away from the dollar and the euro that people have been talking about, de-dollarization, de-euroization.
And this connects to another point. These sources raise a gap between the leadership pushing for continued conflict and what the public actually wants.
A very significant gap, yes, a legitimacy gap. You have leaders talking about this existential fight, while polls show a lot of Europeans, and even many Ukrainians now, are increasingly open to negotiation, to just ending the suffering. It creates internal tension.
These kinds of pressures, internal divisions, external conflicts, Europe's seen this before, hasn't it? History seems relevant here.
Oh, absolutely. Think back to the Balkan Wars before World War I. Great powers definitely prolonged those conflicts for their own strategic reasons. Or the Yugoslav Wars in the 90s that showed intense nationalism, fragmentation, right on Europe's doorstep. There's a historical pattern, perhaps, of grand ambition sometimes leading to breakdown.
Okay, historical parallels are one thing. But you mentioned a modern analogy from South Africa, Eskom, the power company. How does that relate?
It's actually a really interesting comparison some sources make. Eskom, the state power utility, has had massive failures the central system couldn't deliver. And what happened? People didn't just sit in the dark. They started installing their own solar panels, going off-grid, decentralizing.
Right, finding their own solutions.
Exactly. And Eskom lost customers, lost revenue, lost control. Permanently. The analogy suggests that if Europe's central structures or strategies fail spectacularly, you could see a similar move individuals, maybe even nations, looking for more self-sufficient, decentralized answers, eroding the power of the central EU structure.
It paints a picture of desperation, almost like a drowning man, as one analysis put it. Is there any counter-argument in these sources? Any suggestion this gamble could actually work out, lead to renewal?
The sources we looked at focus heavily on the risks, honestly. That drowning man analogy seems apt. The idea is that a bloc in desperate straits might lash out, clutch at anyone nearby, and end up dragging allies or bystanders down with it.
How? Through what mechanisms?
Could be financial contagion, an economic crisis spreading, or security escalations, miscalculations that pull other powers into a wider conflict. The risks are systemic.
So wrapping this up then, we've looked at this idea of Europe as a potentially declining power, the neo-Roman delusion, the risks with demographics, economics, seizing assets, the gap with public opinion, historical echoes, even the Eskom analogy. What's the big takeaway for you listening?
Well, is this high-stakes strategy a path back to strength for Europe? Or could it actually hasten some kind of systemic breakdown? Maybe forcing everyone from individuals to nations to focus more on self-reliance, on resilience outside the big structures?
Definitely something to keep in mind as you follow what happens next.